Rewatch Podcast presents the Alien vs. Predator Rewatch. Join us each week as we discuss another film in the Alien, Prometheus, Predator, and Alien vs. Predator franchise. Send your feedback to the Rewatch Podcast at gmail.com. Join us on Facebook at facebook.com/rewatchpodcast or follow us on Twitter at RewatchPod. Today we're discussing Prometheus, starring Noomi Rapace, Michael Fassbender, Charlize Theron, Idris Elba, Guy Pearce, Logan Marshall Green, Sean Harris, and Rafi Spall, directed by Ridley Scott. Welcome back to the Rewatch Podcast. I'm Cory, and sometimes to create, one must first destroy.
And I'm Nathan, and look, I'm just a geologist. I love rocks. I love rocks. How are you, buddy?
Yeah, excellent, mate.
We're back to talk about Prometheus, so how about we get into the trailer?
Let's do it.
A king has his reign. And then he dies. It's inevitable.
Prometheus has landed.
These are ancient civilizations that were separated by centuries, and yet this same pictogram was discovered in every one of them.
They're smiling.
I think they want us to come and find them.
We're all here because of a map you two kids found in a cave.
Not a map. An invitation.
From whom?
Please tell me you can read that.
Prometheus, are you seeing this?
Whatever that probe is picking up, it's reading life form.
What do you mean a life form?
Oh, the head. They're changing.
Changing into what?
It's moving? These things moving?
What is that?
That is a ship.
They're leaving
To go where?
Earth.
We were so wrong. Take us home! If you don't stop it, there won't be any home to go back to.
Why is that door open? Cut it off! Cut it off!
Big things have small beginnings.
All right, welcome back. This is our last Alien versus Predator discussion.
Well, for the time being, until anything new comes out.
And I think there's definitely new stuff coming out, isn't there?
There definitely is. So just like Star Trek, we'll cover that as well, whenever it shows up. But yeah, let's get into the trivia. So Prometheus had a budget of between $120-130 million, made a worldwide box office of $403 million. Quite conventional, really, for what is ostensibly an Alien prequel, right?
Yeah, the film kind of, as you say, came out in 2012, so it kind of falls into that category of films that have these mega budgets, and then they make this huge amount of money worldwide, but yet on the internet, they're not really considered like a success per se, if you know what I mean. So, just when I look at this, you go, well, $120 million versus $400 million worldwide. It smelt like a bit of a home run to me. And if you go off the box office of the last previous kind of Alien vs. Predator films and Predator films as well, they certainly haven't done as well as this, have they? So even though critically speaking there may have been a bit of a question mark over this film, people were interested, weren't they? They were interested in the return of Ridley Scott.
Well, I think that's the main draw for this because, you know, we've discussed where the Alien franchise went. It was going downhill. Alien 3, Resurrection, the Alien versus Predator films. I mean, they'd poisoned the well, I think, a little bit. And a lot of people were just like, seriously? I think having Ridley Scott on board may have given people a bit of good grace, but I mean, still, 400 million. I mean, that's nothing to scoff at. Don't get me wrong. I mean, that's definitely a success of a movie. But man, like Marvel is doing like $1 billion. So I mean, come on.
You're dead right. And this is post Iron Man and Captain America and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And if I remember correctly, Ridley Scott was very apprehensive about telling people that this is a prequel to Alien. I remember it being like him sort of saying that sort of it is, but not really, and people were like, well, what is it? We don't know. If they had just straight up told everybody this is a prequel to Alien and it's got Ridley Scott at the helm, I think this movie would have done a lot better.
Ridley Scott's a wonderful director. He made Alien, he made Blade Runner, and he did Gladiator in 2000. But in the years prior to Prometheus coming out, he was certainly wanting for like a bit of a critical kind of darling hit. I mean, his film just prior to this was Robin Hood, which I actually never saw, but I heard it wasn't that great. I mean, I'm not too sure if you caught up on that one. Before that, there was Body of Lies in 2008. American Gangster was before that. Another Russell Crowe Denzel film was from 2007. A Good Year in 2006. And Kingdom of Heaven in 2005. You'd probably have to go all the way back to Black Hawk Down in 2001. Was probably his last kind of critically interesting directorial effort. I mean, I'm not saying he didn't make interesting or okay films, but they certainly weren't as well regarded as his earlier, like, you know, Alien, Blade Runner, Thelma and Louise, Legend, all those kind of films. I mean, he's got the runs on the board, but he took his foot off the gas probably slightly just before Prometheus. Is that a fair comment, Corey?
I think so. And I think you're right. Like Black Hawk Down did well critically. So did American Gangster, but those other films, they were kind of hit and miss, especially Robin Hood. I mean, that movie was just whatever. Like, I watched it, I'm like, what's this? Ugh.
And you know what, man? That film was hyped as well. Like there was a lot of talk about when Robin Hood came out, and it just showed up and it just kind of just disappeared really, really quickly. I mean, the film had a pedigree as well. It had Russell Crowe, Cate Blanchett, Max von Sydow. As usual, had a very strong cast, but for whatever reason, it just didn't connect with audiences. And especially also Kingdom of Heaven was another one that I think exhausted his artistic kind of credibility a little bit as well. If I remember rightly, though, Kingdom of Heaven's one of those films that I think there's an extended cut out there with about 30 or 40 minutes put back into it, and I think that is more well received than the theatrical cut that got put into the cinema for whatever reason. So if you're after a more interesting version, go and check out the director's cut of that film.
Yeah, and the other thing that makes this movie, Prometheus, quite interesting is that he was very much for going as practical as possible. I mean, that's nearly impossible in this day and age, but he was quite big on it. And, you know, he said, we're going to do as much practical as we can. And this came as a piece of advice that he got from a guy named Douglas Trumbull.
Douglas Trumbull is famous for being one of the VFX guys on like 2001, working with Kubrick, and he's a legend of the VFX industry. And so obviously he was giving very succinct kind of advice to Ridley Scott to try and keep it practical, and if you can do it live, do it live. I think Ridley's tried to take that ethic with this film, but when I was actually putting the trivia together, it was kind of one of those things that irritated me a little bit, because I heard about him trying to be as practical as possible with this film, but yet in the next line of trivia, I read that there was 1,300 digital VFX shots in this film, and you feel it, don't you? Yeah,
you know, he couldn't straight up do what he did with Alien. Just going by budgets, you're working with a studio as well, which is going to mandate the way you do certain things. So, yeah, you know, it can feel like they're in the world, but there is a lot of digital going on, and it does take it away from that Alien feel. This feels very different to what Alien was. As opposed to the first Alien film, as you say, the first Alien film is
God, I mean, I remember when we talked about that film 10 podcasts ago or whatever it was, we were both gushing about just how brilliantly it was conceived and, you know, the set design and the effects and the way the creature looked and the suspense of the filmmaking and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that film is a masterpiece. I mean, I think I mentioned in that earlier podcast if there was like 5 must-see films, then Alien is certainly one of them. It's a great piece of cinema. So to kind of get to Prometheus and kind of have that pedigree and that weight on your shoulder, it's a hard act to follow, isn't it, man?
I mean, he even went back to H.R. Geiger to help him design mostly the alien, because we get a glimpse of the alien at the very end of the film. And he wanted to sort of like reverse engineer the design a little bit to have it look different, and it does. It looks very, very different. But yeah, you know, so he's definitely trying to tap in to that original.
It looks quite shiny, doesn't it?
It really does. And unfortunately, Geiger died only 2 years after this film was made. He had a fall and passed away.
That was a bit of a shock when that happened. So yeah, very sad. Now, to prepare for his role as the android, David Fassbender actually watched Blade Runner, The Man Who Fell to Earth, and The Servant, and Lawrence of Arabia, who he kind of takes his cue from as far as his look is concerned, because there's a bit of a strange sequence at the start of the film. Obviously, we'll talk more as we get into it, but he's watching Lawrence of Arabia and he's very influenced by Peter O'Toole.
Yeah, another one I saw was that he did actually derive a bit of his movements from famous Olympic diver Greg Louganis. His physicality was quite interesting, so apparently Fassbender actually used that in his portrayal as well, in the way he moved. Kind of sleek.
Another piece of interesting trivia is Charlize Theron was actually originally cast as Elizabeth Shaw, but actually had to decline the role to a scheduling conflict. After the schedules kind of shifted, it actually freed Theron to actually do the film, thus allowing her to take the role of Meredith Vickers, as Noomi Rapace had already taken the role of Shaw. And as we all, well, I'm assuming people know, but Noomi Rapace was very famous from appearing in all those Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, The Girl Who Played with Fire films, the Swedish versions, might I say. And she left quite an imprint on the cinematic world, taking the role of Lisbeth Salander, and she was very striking looking. And I remember she got the role in this film. I think her first role outside of the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo films wasn't she in Sherlock Holmes, the sequel? I think she was in that film, and I remember I think she showed up in the Guy Ritchie film, and then she took on Prometheus, which is an interesting choice. But, you know, just between me and you, Corey, I kind of wish Charlize Theron had actually got the role of Shaw, because it probably would have been slightly better.
And thinking about it too, I would imagine that she was probably filming for Fury Road at the time, because that filmed like long before the movie actually came out, and I could understand how that could get in the way of her booking any other movies, you know, because that was, from what I understand, a very hectic schedule.
In 2002, Aliens director James Cameron actually discussed the idea for a 5th Alien film with Ridley Scott, with the intention that Cameron would actually produce the film with Scott directing, and Sigourney Weaver returning to star in the lead role of Ripley. However, upon discovering that 20th Century Fox were actually developing a crossover film, Cameron actually ceased all work on the project, believing that the crossover would actually kill the validity of the franchise. Cameron went on to state that he would never again work with the Alien franchise. It's kind of interesting that things were kind of happening that early on, and I think James Cameron's possibly overreacting slightly. I mean, I like James Cameron, but he doesn't really make too many movies these days, does he?
He's making gigantic blockbuster films with massive budgets and stuff that take forever to film, so I'm not surprised. The guy's above it, you know. It would be like him coming back and doing Terminator 6. I mean, like, seriously, you'd be like, why is James Cameron doing this?
This is something that I really want to bring up, because I remember all of this quite profoundly during the lead up to this film. There was this very innovative kind of viral campaign that was actually used to promote the film, consisting of several videos depicting the near future world from the film itself. And the first was actually a fake TED Talk given by Peter Whalen, played by Guy Pearce. The talk was actually dated 2023. Later on in the marketing efforts for the film, there's actually two different versions of a commercial promoting the David 8 Android. And these viral videos were actually designed by Ridley Scott and Damon Lindelof, famous for Lost, and I think he was involved in that show Alcatraz. The viral videos were actually directed by Scott's son, Luke Scott. So I remember these videos, and I'm sure you do too, and they were great. I remember they really created genuine A-grade buzz for the film and kind of got you excited about it, yeah? Like, do you remember?
I do remember, and it's definitely a cue that Lindelof would have taken from Lost. Because Lost did this as well. They often put out little, like unseen scenes from an episode or something, because Lost was chronological but unchronological, and there were certain things that would be talked about but you didn't see, and they would put them out online as little secret videos, and then they would do like fake TV shows. There was one called Mysteries of the Universe, which talked about the Dharma Initiative, this elusive company that nobody knows about, and people loved them. I loved them. I'm a big fan of Lost, so definitely a cue from that. Let's do some like fake TED Talk things and make people think that it's real in a way, sort of grounded in reality, like you're uncovering something that doesn't actually appear on screen but gives you a little bit of definition about the movie you're about to watch. It's a very cool idea.
You're right. I loved it. I thought it was a really interesting way to kind of get the internet talking about it and buzzing for the excitement of Prometheus, and talk about creating just like free marketing and just getting the word out there about this stuff. It just works really, really well, and maybe kind of, other films can kind of maybe take their cue if they can by making these kind of things. I just thought it was really effective with this particular film. Not in saying that though, even if there was no trailers or no viral videos, me and you still would have gone to see this film simply by knowing it was Ridley Scott and Alien. Yeah,
exactly.
That's all we needed to know to get us into the theater.
Exactly. And like I said, if they really pushed that a lot more, it probably would have drawn in a lot more people. But not enough people knew about that information, other than it's Ridley Scott. They didn't push that Alien connection quite as heavy. And the other interesting thing here is that this movie actually does have a tie with Predator, or should I say Alien versus Predator, in a weird backwards kind of way, not directly. But there is an actor in this film called Ian White, who plays what they call the last engineer, the big guy at the end who comes out of the stasis pod. He actually played the Predator in both AVP and Alien vs. Predator Requiem. Because that guy's a big dude. He's a big, tall dude. And he looked good in the suit.
He's got that presence about him. And he's pretty good, isn't he? Definitely.
Yeah. And they brought him on to play the last engineer in this movie. So a weird Predator connection. But it does tie it back to Alien and Predator, bizarrely.
The last thing I want to talk about is that this film was never going to be called Prometheus. The film was actually originally called Paradise. And they decided to change it to Prometheus, being the name of the ship that's carrying them to this distant planet.
It's a cool metaphor, the whole thing about reaching out and speaking to God only to be cast out and all that stuff, it makes sense. All right, well, let's get into our discussion of the movie, eh? Prometheus. Now, I'm going to say from the get-go that this movie is awfully confusing. I don't know how you felt coming away from it, but by the end, I'm like, I think I get it.
I'm just going to say off the bat that it's confusing and convoluted quite unnecessarily. Obviously, we'll talk about the film as we kind of get into it, the actual story arc and whatnot, but you're not wrong. They're trying to explain something that I'm not too sure any of us were really asking as the viewer.
We're going to get to it, but this is going to sort of cover the space jockey. We talked about that space jockey scene in Alien, and it was just so mysterious and so bizarre, and you're like, what is this? This is weird. And this movie wants to tell you about this species. They start with this humanoid-looking character. Later in the movie, they're going to refer to them as the engineers. These are the people they believe created humanity on Earth. And there's this just bizarre scene by a waterfall where one of them strips down, drinks this black liquid thing, and then disintegrates.
It's looking pretty solid too, man. There's muscles everywhere. You know what I mean?
I'm still not sure what this was all about. Like,
Yeah.
why did he drink this stuff and disintegrate and fall into the water? And then we get all close-ups of, like, DNA strands falling apart and whatnot. What?
I suppose it's trying to give you some sense of what they're doing on this planet somehow, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense. And I don't know, man, it kind of washed over me a little bit when I saw it. I just accepted it and just kind of moved on. But
Well, later they're going to get into what this black substance is. That doesn't quite mash up very well, does it?
no, not really.
But we'll get to it anyway, because we cut back, we're on Earth 2089, and we're with archaeologists Elizabeth Shaw and Charlie Holloway, and they are at some sort of dig in Scotland, and they find this cave, and they see a constellation depicted there, and this is kind of setting them up. Like, they've been finding this constellation in images all over the world with cultures who were centuries apart from each other, never had any contact, yet they're all drawing this constellation. And they kind of think that this has connections with our creator, which, like I mentioned, they call the engineers.
Yes.
And these beings have been coming to Earth forever and leaving clues on how to find them. And that's what they want to do. They want to go out into the universe and track down these engineers, right?
And yeah, that's and they get super excited about, like she's in the cave and she gets Charlie Holloway up there. She's really keen to kind of get on with it. And like, we found it. It's a bit of a eureka moment, isn't it? Like, these people's names are going to be etched in history as being like the discoverers of human existence. And it's also kind of, there's a bit of like a God kind of mentality, like to prove that God kind of doesn't exist, that he didn't create everything, and to prove that we kind of come from a long line of aliens, for use of a better term. So we get our two archaeologists, and the next time we meet them, they're on a ship, and they've put like a bit of a team together to kind of, well, at this stage, no one apart from the two archaeologists know where they're going or what they're actually doing, which I found to be a very strange story concept. The fact that you wouldn't brief these people like fairly succinctly and clearly as to exactly what they're doing there. Like, you know what I mean?
They're all just brought on board secretly. Like, they just said, we're going on this mission out into the universe, come along. And they're all in cryosleep, just as, we saw in Alien. And there's this android, David, played by the awesome Michael Fassbender, probably one of the best actors in this movie, in my opinion. And he's sort of just in charge of the upkeep of the ship and everything while everyone's sleeping, and you see him doing random things like playing pool or bleaching his hair to look like Peter O'Toole. And it's just a weird thing about, like, this whole thing about humanity and stuff like that. Because later he gets sort of chastised by Peter Wayland about not having a soul or being human or anything like that. It's just this weird interweave that they throw in there. But they arrive and he wakes everybody up, and yeah, they're going to get briefed on what they're doing there.
Hello, friends. My name is Peter Wayland. I am your employer. I am recording this 22 June. 2091. And if you're watching it, you have reached your destination. And I am long dead. May I rest in peace. There's a man sitting with you today. His name is David. He is the closest thing to a son I will ever have. Unfortunately, he is not human. He will never grow old, and he will never die. And yet he is unable to appreciate these remarkable gifts. For that would require the one thing that David will never have: a soul. I have spent my entire lifetime contemplating the questions. Where do we come from? What is our purpose? What happens when we die? And I have finally found two people who have convinced me they're on the verge of answering them. Doctors Holloway and Shaw, if you would please stand. As far as you're concerned, they're both in charge. The Titan, Prometheus, wanted to give mankind equal footing with the gods. For that, he was cast from Olympus. Well, my friends, the time has finally come for his return.
Again, it's really not too dissimilar from the second Aliens, where they kind of bring in like all the specialists that are kind of unique to this job and people that can actually do it. And they're a bit of a motley crew, aren't they? They really go out of their way to try and make them a bit of a motley crew in this way. Like fairly unlikable people, most of them. I found it anyway. I found it hard to sympathise with most of the probably the people that I liked the most was probably like the Idris Elba character, but all of the other guys, like the rock guys, just didn't really like them very much, and they were really cranky about their job and being there, and they just weren't very helpful, and they weren't very good team players. Like if you were going to put together a $1 trillion expedition to go and find the existence of humanity and where we're actually from, like where we are from, the actual phrase itself, you would put the best of the best and actually have them highly organized and arranged. And something else that I kind of found interesting, and it didn't quite make sense to me, is like if you've got this really important expedition, wouldn't you kind of wake them up slightly earlier than just like a day or two before they arrive at this place? And like surely a rapport amongst the team is kind of important in this situation to make sure that everyone gets along and everyone's happy and whatnot, where the movie kind of points out they wake them all from cryosleep, they brief them as to why they're there. No one knows why they're there, and they have this really long-winded, I mean, to be fair, the sequence isn't actually that bad. It's interesting. But they have this scene where they're kind of in this big hall and they're all kind of sitting on the seats and these holograms appear. And you get Peter Whalen as like what looks like 120-year-old man brief them as to exactly why they're there. And I know this is just an aesthetic thing, Corey, but why on earth didn't they just hire an old guy? Because Guy Pearce looks ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Like, I would have thought with the budget that they had on Prometheus, they could afford a mirror on set, because they clearly didn't have a mirror when they were doing Guy Pearce's makeup, because he looked ridiculous.
It's an interesting choice to have a young actor play someone so old. I could understand it if they were going to do scenes where he had to be young, like we saw him as a young man and then we saw him as an old man. That I could understand. No, this whole movie, he plays an old man. It's a bizarre choice.
It's really strange, and it takes you out of the movie, because I know who Guy Pearce is. He's not a 90-year-old guy. He's like in his 40s guy, and he's a good actor. Going back to those viral videos of the TED Talk, he was way better in that than he is in anything for the rest of this film. The makeup swallows him up as an actor, and he is bordering on weird and a little bit strange, truthfully.
And it's weird that this crew just has no idea why they're there. I mean, they've got like a few different ologists aside from our two archaeologists. They've got a geologist, a biologist, and then just some ancillary characters. Idris Elba's thrown in there as the captain of the ship. And then you've got a couple of people who fly the ship. And then you've got Charlize Theron playing Vickers, and they really dodge why she's there.
Oh, totally.
It's bizarre. Yeah. And they kind of cut to her stilted reactions.
Don't they kind of allude to the fact that she's been sent by the company to kind of watch over the mission? Yeah. I think they point out that she's like the supervisor. She's not necessarily like on the ground. She's staying in the ship, but she's kind of overseeing it, and she's clearly the boss.
Peter Whalen throws out that he considers David, the android, the closest thing he has to a son.
Yeah.
But then chastises him for being a robot and without feelings and stuff. And yeah, they just cut to Vickers' stilted reactions to this kind of information. It's bizarre that they hold it close to the chest, but spoiler alert, she turns out to be Whalen's daughter. I don't know why they had to hide that.
You actually don't know that Peter Whalen is on the ship, but we'll talk more about that as we get into it.
And a big retcon too with Peter Whalen, because if anything we learnt about the Whalen or Whalen-Yutani Corporation in the sequels was that it was actually owned by a guy named Charles Bishop Whalen.
Come on, mate. You're forgetting like one of the most important pieces of Alien and Predator history, mate, is when you meet Miss Yutani at the end of Alien vs. Predator Requiem.
But it's still not Whalen and Yutani at this point. It is the Whalen Corporation with Peter Whalen at their head. So, yeah, bit of a retcon, but that's fine. I guess he wants to distance himself from Alien sequels or Alien vs. Predator films and all that. So, whatever.
So we've got the Prometheus, and it basically lands on this barren, very mountainous surface near a large artificial structure, which the team is clearly there to explore. And I didn't mind all this kind of sequence. I found all the kind of rapport between the shuttle team kind of landing it like a bit forced. Like there was that Asian guy in there, and he had like a bit of a smart-ass kind of attitude with his co-pilot, and it kind of felt like a little bit forced to me. But that's okay. I thought that whole scene of flying into the planet and then seeing like the pyramids for the first time and how they all lined up and there was clearly something down there. I thought that was a pretty cool sequence actually, and one of the better moments in the film.
They do let it go early as well that this isn't the same moon or planet that Ripley went to. They have a little display that pops up and they've designated this one LV-223. And of course in Alien it was LV-426. So I guess that's something we're going to get to maybe in a Prometheus sequel.
They make a big point of sort of saying, okay, we've landed on the planet. It's 2:00 in the afternoon. Sun's going to go down at 6:00. How about we just do this tomorrow morning? And they're like, no, man, we're going to do this now, man. We're not going to do that. We're not going to sit here and watch what we're doing. And they kind of rush into the pyramid to try and see what is kind of going. Or should I call it a pyramid, or is it just a structure? I can't even remember. So it's like a structure of some description. Yeah. Anyway, I'm probably sounding like I'm a hater on this film. I'm not. I'm really not. But there are some really dumb movie mistakes in this film. Dumb. Perhaps with maybe some better planning, the expedition probably could have had a better outcome than the ending this film gives you. And maybe just kind of getting there and doing some recon on the actual structure. Like they get into the structure and one of the first things they do is, I think the geologist or the biologist, I can't remember which one, has this thing where they throw it into the structure and it flies around and takes like an infrared signal and actually maps out the whole thing. I thought it would have been a good idea to maybe kind of get that intact and actually know what they're up against before charging into the structure, like without really thinking too much.
That's the first thing you do. You throw those things in, let it map out the entire structure, take the night off, go back, chillax, watch a movie or something.
Get to know each other, man.
The next day, when it's all clear and the sun has come back up, hey, we've got a full map of the structure. We know what's going on. Let's head in there now. That makes a lot more sense. But yeah, you're right. Instead, they decide they're going to rush in and they start seeing the dead bodies of these engineers lying around, and they kind of get a hologram that shows that something went down there, maybe a contamination of some kind. They stupidly take off their helmets.
Oh my lord, like what are you doing?
They're just like, hey, we can breathe in here, let's take off our helmets. And you're just like, I don't care if you can breathe or not. Like, there could be anything in there.
Noomi Rapace, or Rapace, I should say, is okay in the lead. She's not, I wouldn't call her the strongest movie star in this film. Like, I think she's clearly outacted by, Charlize Theron and Idris Elba and various kind of other people, and Fassbender as well. Like, she does feel like slightly out of her league, but I think she does do her best. I think the other guy, Charlie Holloway, I wasn't a big fan of him too much. He's a bit of a dick for a good part of the film, and he's just, I'm not too sure it's so much the actor's fault. I think the actor was kind of okay, but he's not the most likable guy in the world.
No, not really.
What is that?
This is a rose that I had frozen with the champagne. I was going to give it to you when we found what we came for.
We did find what we came for. They were here. This is...
the most significant discovery in the history of mankind. Oh, I know. It's incredible. It really is, but I wanted to talk to him. I mean, don't you want to know why they came? Why they abandoned us? Just want answers, baby.
We were right, Charlie. I have proof. Look. Their genetic material predates ours. We come from them.
No.
Okay. Guess you can take your father's cross off now.
Why would I want to do that?
Because they made us.
And who made them?
Well, exactly. We'll never know. But here's what we do know. Is that there is nothing special about the creation of life, right? Anybody can do it. I mean, all you need is a dash of DNA and half a brain, right?
I can't create life. What does that say about me?
Ellie, that's not, I wasn't talking about
Children?
us.
This is where we kind of just get into the nuts and bolts of it. And again, there are some movie mistakes that happen here. Because they go into this room and it starts, I guess, sort of melting or something like that because it's exposed to the atmosphere or whatever. So they're like, we're going to get out of here. But David finds these canisters filled with this black liquid, so he takes some of it. And while they're doing this, the geologist guy and the biologist guy are like, we're going to get the hell out of here. They get lost on their way out.
Oh, I know, like, seriously.
The rest of them, a short time later, are like, okay, there's a storm coming. We should probably get out of here. They leave. The other two are still in there, and they get trapped in there.
Meanwhile, isn't Idris Elba having sex with Charlize Theron whilst they're getting trapped?
Calls her a robot, and so she's just like, well, bring it on then. Let's do it. Yeah, show you how much of not a robot I am.
Yeah, that's right. Is that all it takes to get Charlize Theron? Obviously. To call her a robot?
Whatever.
Whatever, exactly.
And then David goes about poisoning Charlie's drink with this black poison, right?
Yeah.
So he's got the black stuff in him, and we saw what happened to the engineer at the beginning of the movie. You think he's just going to disintegrate or whatever. That doesn't happen to him. Instead, it mutates his DNA or something, and then he sleeps with Elizabeth and impregnates her with something. It's weird.
It's drawing a very long bow. I'm a big believer, and I think you know this about me, of just kind of when you're watching films, you just accept it, yeah? Like, even if it's like far-fetched and ridiculous, there's a part of you that just has to just go with the flow and just accept that, you know, a hobbit is really, really short and the elves are really, really tall, and you just accept it, even though it doesn't really make a lot of sense. You just do, and it's just part of, you know, why you watch movies and how you accept it. But sometimes they go a little bit too far, and this kind of film does, especially with all the previous Alien films and Alien versus Predator films and whatnot. And like, there's a very stone cold mythology in place about how this kind of stuff works, and they screw with it a little bit in this film, don't they?
Because in the meantime, back in the structure where the two guys are trapped, the black liquid gets on some worms or something, and those worms turn into what kind of look like face huggers, but they're snakes.
I didn't like any of that.
You see it coming as well. Like, this snake comes up out of the black liquid, and the dude's just like, oh no, it's okay. Like, it's fine. And then he talks to it like it's a puppy. And the thing attacks him, and you're like, what did you think was going to happen, you idiot?
It sprays on his helmet, and then you kind of get the acidic blood kind of thing happening. And that's basically the last that we see of Milburn.
Fifield comes back later in a strange attack. Like, he gets all weirdly mutated with his legs up over his head or something and attacks everybody for whatever reason. It's just a weird series of events.
Shaw and the rest of the team, before this has actually happened, they actually discover a body of the engineer, and actually there's a head or some kind of helmet that they are desperate to find. And it's kind of this really weird sequence, actually, where they actually find the body without the head, and the body, there's like a door kind of separating them. And then out of the blue, Michael Fassbender, through his kind of knowledge of the language and actually studying things, opens the door, and they actually get the head out of the way. Now, keep in mind, outside the structure at this stage, there is this ginormous storm. They've been told by Idris Elba to get out of there pretty quickly or they're going to be staying the night. They obviously do. They grab the helmet and they rush back to the ship. As far as action sequences are concerned, I thought the whole storm thing was a pretty cool sequence, yeah? What do you think?
Getting her in that situation, it was inevitable. You know, she wanted to save the head, so she runs back out into the storm, and then David has to save them. It was fine for what it is. But then immediately they do a test on the head and bring it back to life.
They got it to open its eyes and it kind of looks a bit strange, and then I think doesn't Shaw do something to it and the head explodes.
And I think this is what gives them the first idea that this is some sort of virus. In the holograms, they saw them all like running away and whatnot, and they're like, this could be some sort of viral contaminant or something. And they pretty much figure out that this moon or planet or whatever that they're on isn't the home planet of the engineers. This is like some sort of military installation where they build biological weapons, and they were actually set on taking these said biological weapons, this black liquid, and using it to wipe out Earth for reasons.
Yes, and again, I go back to my phrase, drawing a long bow. But it is what it is. Like, you just, as I say, you just kind of watch it. And I struggled with that logic a little bit, that they kind of came to that conclusion. And David is kind of sneaking a bit around behind the scenes as well. Like, he keeps turning off his camera on his visor and not letting the Prometheus and Vickers and whatnot actually see what he's actually doing. And he actually discovers a control room which actually contains a surviving engineer in stasis. And as you say, like the star map which highlighted Earth, all of a sudden they're in a panic, and rather than discovering the DNA history of humanity, all of a sudden the engineer is their enemy, isn't it?
They set up this weird thing about how Vickers' quarters on the Prometheus is its like own self-contained unit, which could be used as like a lifeboat. And inside this lifeboat, there is this machine that does emergency surgery on you. Elizabeth is impregnated with this thing, and she knows it's like grown inside of her over just a couple of hours. And by this time, Holloway is also dead. And she goes to this device and has the creature removed, and it comes out like this squid-looking thing. And then she just leaves it there. Like, she just locks the room and leaves it there. Upon stumbling out, finds that they have revived Peter Whalen, who was also in stasis. And then nobody does anything about the creature in the room. It's just there. And then it comes back later. And I'm like, why did everybody... Because they leave the ship. Because Peter Whalen's whole thing is that he wants to speak to the engineers, figure out the secrets to life, if they created us, and then he won't die, being the old man that he is. It's just a lot of give-me's. He's like, seriously, they just left that creature flopping around in that room.
They could have solved a lot of problems by eliminating that thing pretty early on, and for whatever reason they kind of chose not to, which is a strange decision. But anyway, it is what it is. But yeah, no, you're dead right. We now meet Mr. Whalen, who's kind of emerged from his, hypersleep, living on this kind of wing of the ship, unnoticed, might I add, for 3 or 4 years or whatever it is that they're kind of there. Obviously, David knew, because he clearly has kind of a very different connection to Mr. Whalen than pretty much everyone else does. So they're obviously on their way to meet this engineer who was in stasis himself, and they're actually waking him up. Once they're kind of waking up and try to communicate with him, the actual engineer actually responds by ripping David's head off, which is a bit of a thing for the rest of the film, and killing Wayland and his team before actually reactivating the spacecraft. Upon kind of seeing this conclusion from the engineers, Shaw actually flees and actually warns Janek that the engineer is actually planning to release the liquid on Earth, convincing him to stop the spacecraft. Something I kind of did wish in this film was perhaps like, I know Idris Elba was kind of like the boss of the ship. I don't know, man. I kind of feel like what was part of the issue with these films is perhaps like maybe a few too many characters. Like maybe if you got rid of the, Charlie Holloway character and kind of put the Idris Elba in there, it kind of would have a bit more kind of acting weight. Same with, like, imagine this film without Noomi Rapace and Logan Marshall Green or whatever his name is, and actually replacing them with Charlize Theron and Idris Elba in exactly the same same roles, but just a little bit more beefier, I think the film would have had a lot more weight to it, and maybe just kind of simplified the concept of the engineers and whatnot. It's a bit of a strange conclusion, yeah?
Yeah, it is, because she really does just get on the thing and say, hey, Janek, it's heading to Earth and it's going to destroy us all, so you got to stop it. So Charlize Theron bugs out.
Doesn't she say, like, I command you not to do this, and, you know, I'm the boss of this $1 trillion trip or whatever it is, and he just says, well, screw you, man, like, this thing's going to kill Earth, I've got to do something about it now.
Yeah, so she bugs out in an escape pod. He rams the ship with the Prometheus ship, and the whole thing comes down, and then it crushes Charlize Theron when she could have just, like, ran to the left or right. Instead, she runs straight forward.
I know. She's running, like, away from it, but she's, like, it's in the way that it's falling, and it's really quite ridiculous kind of scene.
Noomi Rapace, like, she falls over as well, and she's on the ground. She sees this thing coming down on her. She rolls, like, 2 times to the left.
I know. And she's
out of the way, so.
I know, she escapes. Yeah, anyway. So, Shaw, as you say, Shaw goes to the lifeboat, and David's still active. Head actually warns Shaw that the engineer actually has survived, and David actually says, you know, she better get going, this thing's going to get you, kind of thing, yeah, essentially. And the engineer actually forces open the lifeboat's airlock and actually attacks Shaw, who actually releases her alien offspring onto the engineer, which is a lot bigger by that stage.
Yeah,
isn't it?
It looks like a giant face hugger at this point, but not as spidery. It still kind of has that squid-like look to it. It's just giant now. And it face hugs him, but gives him like a full body face hug.
So it actually plants something down the engineer's throat, which actually subdues the engineer from attacking Shaw. And Shaw actually recovers David's remains, and with his help actually launches another engineer spacecraft, because I don't think Shaw was actually going to do anything with David and wasn't prepared to kind of go down that path. But it's only when David points out to Shaw that this is not the only ship. You know, like, there's actually other ships here. He can actually fly them. And it's at that point that she decides to try and help Dave, and actually, you know, she needs him to get out of this tricky situation. So Shaw recovers David's remains and actually launches another engineer spacecraft. She actually intends to actually go to the engineer's homeworld in an attempt to understand why they actually wanted to destroy humanity. And that's basically the last that we see of our friend Elizabeth Shaw and David until we get, I'm assuming they're in the sequel coming out in a few months or next year, I think it is, isn't it?
I don't know, honestly. I haven't really looked much into what the storyline is going to be, but yeah, I mean, she doesn't even want to go back to Earth. She wants to try and track down the homeworld, which may or may not be LV-426, or that could have just been another biological weapons site for all we know.
Yeah, well, who knows, man? So the last shot of the film, it actually comes back to the lifeboat. It's actually at that point that we actually see an alien creature bursting out of the engineer's chest. It's a strange looking thing, isn't it?
Yeah, it kind of looks like an alien, but it's grey. It doesn't have like the little mouth inside the main mouth. It's got like dog's snarl or something. I don't know. It resembles an alien, but I guess it's not as bad as that weird birthed alien from Resurrection, so it's got that going for it.
Yeah, no, you're right. That thing was weird, man. Don't make me think of that again.
But that's pretty much it.
That's it. And then we're at the end of our Alien and Predator run.
A superior species, no doubt. Their hypersleep chambers will impress, I trust.
So they were traveling somewhere.
I've managed to work out the broad strokes. It's fairly evident they were in the process of leaving before things went apart.
Leaving to go where?
Earth.
Why?
Sometimes to create, one must first destroy.
Where is he, David?
This way, sir.
You sure he's alive?
Absolutely.
And you can speak to him?
I believe I can.
I'm all right. I'm all right. Speak to him, David. Tell him we came, just like he asked.
Ask him where they're from.
What are you doing?
Ask him what's in his cargo. It killed his people.
Sure. Enough. David.
You made it here, and it was meant for us. Why?
Sure, enough. For God's sake, shut her up.
Was it? I need to know why. What did we do wrong? Why do you hate us?
If she opens her mouth again, shoot her. David, continue. Tell him why I came.
Manamai. Jana murtu steda. Uiva. On itam sa stater kreda.
So, ratings? Recommend?
I don't think I can recommend this one, truthfully. I'm not a hater. I have watched this film a few times and I don't mind aspects of it. I think it's brave what they're trying to do. But as I said to you, man, I think they're trying to answer questions that no one's really asking. Like if they really want to do something brave and different, take us to the alien homeworld or whatever it might be, or where they actually predominantly come from, or just show us something a little bit more significant. I thought the engineer concept was verging on a bit silly. I was always kind of worried that the whole Alien franchise would kind of veer into the silliness aspect because it's almost silly, but it's not quite. But the engineer, I didn't really buy it. I just don't know if I can recommend this one. I think it's okay. If I had to give it a score, I'm going to give it probably 4 Davids out of 10. I think that's kind of where I'm at.
I'm going to just come down middle of the road on this one. It's an okay looking movie. There is some interesting acting going on here. And the story kind of grabs me. Like when I think about it, I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of happy to go here and figure all this out. But there are just so many just unforgivable mistakes. People's motivations don't seem to make sense a lot of the time. It's just confusing a lot. And to tell you the truth, this is only the second time I've watched this movie. I saw it once in the cinema and thought, yeah, whatever, I don't need to watch this again. And now I've watched it again, coming back to it, not really even remembering what the movie was about, other than it was an Alien prequel, and walked away from it going, I really don't understand what the point of this was. It was very, very confusing. I'm just going to give this just a straight middle of the road 5 little squiddies out of 10.
I think we're kind of give or take on the same page, yeah.
But yeah, we'll find out in the future if it can be redeemed. Never know.
Exactly. On to some serious business. What are we going to be doing on the Rewatch next as far as films are concerned?
Decisions have been made.
We're doing something completely different, aren't we?
We are. We're going to go something a bit lighter, just like we did back when we were talking Police Academy. We just wanted to do something a bit fun and a bit interesting at the same time. And of course, when we started this, we got the very tragic news that Gene Wilder passed away. And we got to thinking at the time, you know what? Some of his best films were when he collaborated with another comedy great, Richard Pryor. Thus, we decided that we would just do a smaller run and discuss the 4 films that Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor collaborated on.
They made Silver Streak in 1976. They did Stir Crazy in 1980. They then went on to make the comedy classic See No Evil, Hear No Evil in 1989. And they actually did a final film in 91.
Another You in 91. Just a short little 4-episode set, but yeah, hopefully we'll be able to get to that probably as the year rolls out. So maybe over December or into January possibly. Probably while Tom and I are taking a break over the holiday break with the Lois and Clark rewatch. We might roll those episodes out. So we've got some content still rolling out for the Rewatch podcast.
I'm going to put you on the spot quickly. If you just had to give me top 3 Alien films and worst 3 Alien films.
Okay, top 3 Alien. It would be Alien, then Aliens. I'm tossing up between Resurrection and the first AVP. Maybe just into AVP. I think maybe AVP might be my number 3.
Yeah, I think my top 3 is probably, you're right, Alien and Aliens. Then I think I'm going to put AVP. I quite liked AVP more than I thought I did. Alien, and like my bottom 3 is probably the worst one by far is Requiem. That's kind of, I don't think there's any argument. Resurrection for me, I just did not do very well. A film that we kind of mentioned is Predators. Predators is a good one too.
Yeah, well, the bottom for me was Alien 3. I hated that movie. Then Requiem. Then I guess, yeah, I would have to go with Resurrection. But as for Predator, I mean, in order that I liked them, the first one, without a doubt. Then Predators. And then Predator 2. I still think I probably like Predator 2 better than I liked either of the AVP movies.
It's a fair call. I think I'm kind of with you on that. I remember liking Predator 2 more than I probably should have. That's okay. So that's it for this episode of the Rewatch Podcast. Keep up with listener interaction by joining our Facebook page at facebook.com/Rewatch Podcast and follow the show on Twitter at RewatchPod and visit our webpage rewatchpodcast.podomatic.com.
And as always, you can write us an email or record a voice message, send it to the rewatchpodcast@gmail.com. And if you've enjoyed the show, please consider giving us a rate and review on iTunes. It's always very helpful. And you can help support the Rewatch Podcast by heading over to patreon.com/rewatchpodcast, where you can make a monthly contribution as little as $1. And of course, our entire back catalogue is up on YouTube, so you can just search Rewatch Podcast and subscribe today. Thank you for joining me for these 10 films. I'll just say, until next time, it must feel like God has abandoned you.
And how far would you go to get your answers?
The Rewatch Podcast is not associated with the copyright holders of these films, and no copyright infringement is intended. The use of any and all copyrighted material is only for parody, news analysis, critique, or educational purposes as provided in Title 17, aka Fair Use. Music provided by Kevin McCloud at incompetech.com. Copyright 2016, The Rewatch Podcast. Hi, Rewatch Podcast listeners. I'm Corey.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Nathan.
First off, let me say that we have all had a blast doing the Rewatch Podcast. Every week, we put out another episode for free for you. And although we enjoy these discussions with each other, we truly do this for you guys out there in podcast land.
That's right, Corey. But we are here today to tell you about Patreon. Every week, there are costs involved in podcasting about film and television, including hosting and bandwidth charges, our own personal internet usage, and film or show rentals and purchases. So, we're asking you to become a Patreon supporter.
If you can afford as little as $1 to throw our way per month, it would really help us keep the lights on. And if you want to send $100 our way every month, we wouldn't turn that down either. But it's your choice, and we appreciate the support you bring.
As always, we strive to bring you the best quality shows we can create, and we hope that you enjoy them. So head on over to patreon.com/rewatchpodcast to become one of our patrons and show your support for the Rewatch Podcast.
And if we get enough patrons, we may even be able to produce exclusive content just for the supporters in the form of simply getting episodes before the main feed release, or even bonus film discussion episodes as a thank you for your support. The website again is patreon.com/rewatchpodcast.
Thanks, everyone.